All right, let's go.
Does this shirt make? So
Makes you
we're
look
ready?
fat. Yes.
Let's go. All right. Today is a very cold day in Minnesota. It's -2 outside in the middle of the day. So along that lines, we're having lunch and learn for people that want to know about mergers and acquisitions and what project management and product management has to do with mergers and acquisitions. So we have Jitesh Tank and G. Zhang that both have experience in this field, and I get to ask them a bunch of questions about mergers and acquisitions and project management, and our two brilliant speakers here today will answer and just be amazing. Yes, so let's open up with like each of you to answer what has you be a speaker about mergers and acquisitions today, and your background in medical devices and healthcare in general. So Jitesh, why don't you go first, please?
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, my journey, I guess my entire career has been in healthcare, starting with pharma, and now most recently med devices. Electronic was my longest tenure experience, 13 years or so, in the mergers and acquisitions department of corporate, so corporate development. I worked with all the divisions within Electronic, the spine, the diabetes, the cardiac, got exposure to the different divisions, and post an acquisition, Kaifon, which many of you in the audience may remember, a spine acquisition, I moved into marketing. And I did that for 5 years, and after that I moved back into cardiac rhythm management, doing business development at the business level, so a strategic partner. Acquired about 4 companies in 5 years, and not only did the acquisitions happen, but I also integrated them. And so I think, as I say, integration is when you really know how good of a due diligence did you do.
Right.
And so you get to make or break an acquisition, if you will. I attended the integration phase. So that's, I would say, my mergers and acquisition experience. Prior to coming to Medtronic, I was in the pharma world, and so my experience there was very technical. I'm a chemist by background, and I did some research in diabetes and depression, and post-business school, I moved over to the med device side.
Okay, and so you're from the acquisition side,
Mhm.
right? So Medtronic,
Mhm.
and Medtronic buys a lot of companies, don't they?
Correct. Yeah, I would say
You
that
said you were with you worked on four different
acquisitions,
Okay.
yeah, and 4 acquisitions and then integrations of them as well.
Right. So it's not really a merger; it was an acquisition.
Yeah, more, yeah, with Medtronic
Yeah.
being the size that it's typically, and obviously they call the Medtronic Covidian merger, but I did not work on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, and G, welcome this morning. Actually, it's now exactly noon, so good afternoon. Here we go. So, yeah, what's your background a little bit?
Sure.
And tell us about your M&A experience.
Sure. Yeah, I came into med device industry about 10 years ago. Started at Boston Scientific as a manufacturing engineer, and so done that for a few years to get my feet wet in the med device industry. From there, became a project manager and then done a few new product introductions, and also involved in a couple rounds of acquisition integrations.
Okay. So let's jump into the whole acquiring and how do you integrate.
Sure.
So, how do you scope an integration? So it must be kind of hard to do from when you know that it's being acquired, because there's so many regulations about what you can't know before a company gets purchased. So how do you scope? How do you set up that first? How big of an effort is that going to be? Let's, G, why don't you start and then
Sure.
Jitesh, such
Yeah.
champion as you would.
I can speak from experience. To me, when it needs to be a top-down kind of a strategy on long-term, how integrated do we need these businesses to be? I've witnessed in my experience of doing integration, the company that we were integrating, they were acquired by the previous company, so they've gone through a round of integration, but that company did not do much the actual integration work. It's more of a conglomerate kind of work, like Warren Buffett will buy your company and leave you alone, do your own thing, continue to do your own thing. They'll go in, that you be added to their Costco membership and you get some of their corporate benefits and you get cash flow from them and other than that, they kind of leave you alone. And that's one way of doing it. When we came in, I suspect Medtronic tried to do a similar way. Our intent is to bring the whole thing in. So you will live in our QMS, you will live, you do business in the Boston Scientific Network, if you will. Every aspect eventually will merge into the new way of doing it. And then from there, you gotta decide when do you do which part. So the overall scope is to convert everything over, but then in the first 6 months, what do you do? First year, what do you do? In the first 5 years, what do you do? I suspect it'll take 3 to 5 years to get it fully integrated. And whether you move building and that kind of stuff, it's gonna be bigger scale, longer term. And what we started off is actually just do the very simple business integration. So we did sales integration and distribution integration. So from the customer's perspective, if you were a hospital, from day X, as a project manager, you will start placing orders in my network. You will receive deliveries from my network. That's the milestone. And so as if, you were independent seller, you sell through Amazon, and when that integration completes, you will start placing orders from Amazon versus from this mom and pop shop, and you will receive delivery through Amazon, as opposed to from original, they probably bring it to the post office and ship it to your house kind of deal.
So that's part of that merger, or part of that acquisition then is letting the acquired company's customers know that they need to then shift how they order it.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Right.
So that kind of
I
framed
suppose
up
you
this scope.
leave that overlapped for a while, and you gotta push them over to, for example, one of the companies you did it to Boston. So like, fewer and fewer of the customers would order from Boston, from whatever, the acquired company, and then they would start ordering from Boston.
Yep.
Okay, so that's just one piece of it.
That's one way of doing it.
Sales, distribution.
Yep.
I suppose HR is a huge deal.
Yep.
So, building, are you gonna bring them in and
Yep.
place them on site?
Yep.
What are some of the other things that you have to consider?
Yeah, I can jump in here.
Please.
Just set a pretty good kind of stage in terms of, I think it has to be top down before we even acquire. Right in the diligence phase, you have to have a clarity as to what you really want to do. Medtronic.
And just sorry to interrupt, but is that set up in advance? So
That's what I kind of have done. So even before you start selecting the diligence team members, you kind of have a discussion that, okay, hey, assuming this thing goes through, we want continuity in the people that are going to be involved in the diligence, and we would love for the same people to actually have participation in integration.
okay.
Because they know the details and the nitty-gritty of where the things need to be taken care of. Obviously, they may not be doing all the work themselves, but having them on board, they may bring in more people in the integration to the detail. But Yeah, it's that early on is what, again, it's a learning. I don't think it's just gonna happen overnight that we did that. But you do a few and then you realize that, okay, it just goes a lot simpler, a lot faster when you actually have people, the same people involved in diligence and going into integration. So integration planning begins in the diligence phase because you're talking about, okay, this is what we found, this is what it will take to integrate, these are the issues to resolve. And so you are thinking with that in mind, right in the diligence phase.
Okay.
And so I would say that is what, again, learning and I think it has worked well. Yeah, electronic philosophy, I think at least in the early, some of the things that I was part of, at least I'd heard of is, they used to leave them alone for a while. And I think the spine acquisition in Memphis was left alone for quite some time. But then, yes, they operate independently, they do things, but there are challenges that come about in branding and in positioning. And so, as the lessons kept coming in post-acquisition, they kind of came to a place that, hey, you know what, we need to start integrating right away. Okay, you can take it slow, but you need to get to a point where we become one Medtronic. It cannot happen over 5 or 6, it has to start happening right away.
Right.
Yeah, but again, it does take time. Because with COVID, I think it's almost 8 years or so, 8 years.
Okay.
But
Well, that was two very large.
two large contracts. And so
Right.
the one that I found, it took about 5 years to get to a place where we felt like we are integrated.
Right. And one of the things that happened with the Covidian and Medtronic merger was, Medtronic did a bunch of changes all at the same time. They brought much of the different parts of each of the divisions into a more central type of thing. I think that's one of the reasons why it took so long, was that they changed how they did businesses at the division level. But,
Yeah, no, it's a mega acquisition. I was not part of it.
Right.
So, yeah.
But it does jump into the next question is, do all mergers and acquisitions have the same set of phases, or is that part of the original plan for the company as they plan out a merger or an acquisition? Is there kind of a standard template, or is it really custom for every time that an acquisition or merger occurs?
I'd say that there is definitely general operating principles for how you want to do an acquisition, integration, and planning, but.
And what are those?
Well, making sure that you are setting a governance structure, right from upfront. You talk about the steering team, which is where you will get the project you can report into, setting objectives for the integration. And again, that hey, you know what, for the acquisition, one of the things that I manage, there are like 7 top level objectives that hey, we want to get this much, and there is of course economic metric that you want to have this much revenue for the acquired company.
Yeah.
You want to have this kind of synergies. You want to have the regulatory approval for certain things in the pipeline of the acquired company. And some of the these are the critical elements that define the success of an acquisition. So you set that out in the objectives right up front. I think that has to be done for every acquisition. And once you set those objectives, and then the next step planning can happen. Okay, what does it take to get there? And who are the people needing to be involved? And what's the timeline? And we typically have 30, 60, 90 day and 120 day reporting to the executive committee, which is the CEO and his staff on any acquisition.
Okay.
And so I think this is the overarching framework.
Okay.
And
Can we go over those real quick? So it's sales, distribution, human resources, regulatory, finance. What did I miss?
I think sales, and again, of course, commercialization, there's a commercial teams integration, sales integration. Sometimes the sales team, sales integration happens a little bit slower than the marketing team integration.
Okay.
And the timing of things is kind of different. Manufacturing, you probably have a lot of insight into.
Oh, yeah, manufacturing.
Design and manufacture, 2 big pieces. When you switch labels, it's, you
Design and development, or just?
Yeah, well,
kind of in the same
You,
breath.
you lived in the last many years in this QMS and you have a set of SOP. You can't just take
Oh, yeah.
bits and pieces and
Quality-
dump it
quality
into this new
systems.
system, right?
Right, so far I have sales, distribution, HR, regulatory, finance, manufacturing, design, development, and quality.
And then I've seen some struggles on the pipeline decisions, right? Who used to be the stakeholder. Typically in my world, those businesses merges into a certain division of the larger corporation. Then they will have a slightly different perspective, right? They are more focused in the therapy area, and if you have a key technology that kind of don't belong, then those decisions ideally get made early, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. Again, that happens in the diligence phase too.
Sure.
Hey,
Yep.
these are great programs that you have in your pipeline, but we are not communicating with them. We are making internal notes on, okay, this is gonna be gone, this is gonna be gone.
Yep.
We're gonna focus on 2 of these 10 programs, and it's not again atypical.
Okay. I kind of jumped in there and took us off course for answering that question about phases. So you said the first one is really the general plans, creating those, governing structure, that sort of stuff. What would the next phase be?
Again, of course, we get into execution, correct? We are done with the planning and now we're in execution mode. Making sure that as a project manager, you are kind of having periodic meetings, regular, a lot more frequent in the early post-acquisition time. Probably at least weekly, not twice a week. Start of the week, end of the week, to see kind of how the progress went. But once we-
Depends on how excited the company is about getting things to happen.
Correct,
Yeah.
and I think when the company is paid, typically quite a few multiples of revenue for anything, or if there's a revenue company, they wanna make sure things are going to timeline. And for a company like Medtronic, external parties are also interested in knowing whether what we told the street is happening in terms of synergies, in terms of revenue milestones. And so, yeah, and there's a lot of visibility.
Okay.
So,
Is there a breakdown inside of execution? Are there things, and you already said sales and distribution was one of the things that you guys did early, but that was for that project,
Yep.
right? It really depends on, let me step back just for a second. Does someone else make those decisions? The project managers really come in, they're more planning and execution.
Yep.
Right, so what needs to be done first is really, it generally happens at more of a corporate level.
Yep.
So, anything else about the execution phase?
I think it's really from my perspective, this is all very tactical. It was pointed out to us what needed to be accomplished, and it was our job to go out there and figure out what's the reasonable time frame to get that accomplished, and then what kind of resources do we need. With that, we'll provide feedback and then get that plan blessed, and then we'll go into execution mode.
Now, I imagine.
If you want to go back one step into planning mode,
Oh, yeah.
I think we just kind of put HR as a bullet, but I feel like that is one of the most important pieces of the whole puzzle. It's people who make the acquisition successful or not, and people who know the technology, who know the manufacturing in and out, and so even in diligence phase, as I said, we start with integration planning, so we are looking at people pieces of who are the key people, identifying them and making sure that you build plans for each of those people moving into the integration, because the integration can start faltering right away when people start transitioning. And I would say that is one of the critical elements, sometimes even more so than anything else, because these people are the ones who will be involved and participating depending on the incentives that you provide and build in to the plan. And so those discussions actually kind of happen right before the closing actually of the transaction too sometimes. And this is what our plan is for you. And so
so do either of you have recommendations for a particular type of, what do we call it, acquisition governance structure? So. It's pretty open.
I think it's
question.
far more of your expertise.
Okay, so
Yeah,
that, again, that depends on how it's set up at the corporate level.
Yeah,
Yeah,
So,
I think I'll just mention one thing, I think it's sometimes helpful to have people from the acquired company on the governance team, you know, as well, because some of
say more, why?
Yeah, well, I think it's, I guess trying to help with the cultural fit aspect of it, you know, there's always different organizations have different cultures and different operating styles, and so we involve the CEOs of small organizations as part of this transition team and the early integration planning and that phase. Typically, the CEO transitions eventually within a few months or maybe 6 months or a year. But I think we keep him intricately involved because he or she is helpful building the bridges with the team that used to report to him previously. And over the year, as people who were reporting to him start reporting into the mothership functions, if you will, I think that bridge building is very important. So I think that aspect has made many of the acquisitions quite successful and less painful, I guess.
Okay, so perhaps one recommendation would be really spend enough time on the culture and important, the key people
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that the assimilation occurs well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
it takes a lot of resources, boots on the ground to execute. And these resources are typically not clearly identified, especially on the acquired business, right? They were running business and they were staffed to do a job that operation need to continue to
Didn't
run.
include being acquired.
Exactly, and therefore, it's not fair to expect them to pick up the, whatever work they needed to do the integration, including teaching us, the acquirer, how their business run and the aspects of how they do business today. It consumes a lot of their time and slows them down on their daily executions. So they just picked up a very, very time consuming hobby to study when we start integrating.
Any ideas for how to help those people?
We've learned hard lessons, obviously, and we've since trying to streamline that effort. In a large corporation setting, oftentimes there will be like 8 project managers in charge of 8 different aspects of the integration, and then you will all storm to the same individual, ask 8 questions the same way, different way of the same question, and then all of a sudden this guy is going to be tired of answering the question 8 different times, and so we found it's best to meet internally, get our ducks in a row. These are our questions that need answered collectively, and let's write them down, let's disseminate it, as opposed to bothering the same guy time and time again. It's obviously more convenient, you can just pick up the phone and ask whatever you want versus doing homework up front. But we were identified internally and dedicated resources to do the job, and we need to be more considerate about the acquired companies and not astronomically increase it with those.
Yeah, completely agree. I think the resource limitation is significant, and typically the same person gets tasked with a few of those. And so I think the simple, if you guys a recommendation from my side was communication. Making sure that that person's manager is fully up to speed on what's going to be asked of their team member and what kind of bandwidth. And so his or her manager, a VP of the function, can figure out a way to say, you know what, okay, I'm going to try and reduce the workload of this person on this, I'm going to put somebody this acquisition is critical to the growth, that's why we're doing it. So I think I want to make this person be available for that full time. And I think that's why I said that communication piece with every functional leader, the VPs of the different functions is extremely important. That's what I think helped me. Before even the acquisition kind of happens and the diligence phase even starts, then I kind of like, okay, this is going to happen. We know the likelihood of things kind of going into kind of the road where we are. So the diligence phase will take bandwidth, and this is a hobby, a very time-consuming hobby. They have the day jobs and they are doing this in the evenings, and so it's 150% of the time that they're working versus 100%. So they're getting paid for 100 only most of the time. So making sure that the team is recognized also, keeping in mind that these guys are working really, really hard and being helpful. So communication is the key thing. And these VPs and functions, they sometimes are not, because if we're keeping the group small on strategy, making sure that the small group knows. But I think it's important for these VPs to know why we are doing this, and so the buy-in starts increasing, and once the buy-in starts increasing, they are much more open to releasing the resources, which are critical to their function, yes, but also to the acquisition. So I think it helps them make better decisions.
Right. Yeah, you guys have already touched on this, but how do you divide and conquer with all of the different parts here? I can see where all of it needs to be done at the same time, but can't, well, average people, but you probably won't. How have you seen the divide and conquer occur? And again, what recommendations do you have for people and companies that are going to do these acquisitions or the acquired company? How do you set up that divide and conquer, get all the work done? What's the best strategies? We won't go into tactics too much, but
What I've seen is there seems to be more and more of a developed, dedicated team that does integration, and therefore these guys eventually get used to working with each other and developing specialties and know one area better than the other kind of deal, and then that become a natural divide on who has what responsibility, and then from there it's really communications, and sometimes seems like a small task, and once you dig into it, you realize it's way more complicated than you anticipated, and then at that point you need to bring in help, and oftentimes bringing in help can slow you down before it could accelerate. So it's more of an art than a science. And another layer that what we've discovered is not quite the traditional project management. Typically the plan can be laid out reasonably good, and then you merge quickly into execution mode, and then just check on status. In these cases, there are usually a lot of unknowns, and then you go in with a lot of assumptions, and then halfway through you find out your assumption was not valid, and you have to quickly react and come to new proposals. And oftentimes the stakeholders are numerous, because your actions, especially in a large corporation setup, has very, very wide impacts. For instance, in regulatory and distribution, you have could be tens or hundreds of between distribution center and losing our word, distributors. You have to compromise and communicate to, and making sure that they're on board with the method of moving forward.
yeah, it's not just your company. If you have distributors actually selling your stuff, all that gets thrown up in the air, isn't it? Because it's a new company they're working with.
Yep, and you have to quickly have a regulatory strategy that fits everyone's bill. So those meetings can oftentimes be several hundred people on board, and it can be very expensive meetings, so you have to have your ducks in a row and communicate clearly. Oftentimes have to do it again and again and again, make sure that it's not misunderstood.
And So, let's have this be the, you know, close to the last part,
Sure.
but before we get into questions. But, from you guys' perspective, what defines a successful integration? When do you say, that was pretty good?
You know, I mentioned from the very start, we have a common set of objectives for the acquisition and integration that, again, sits at the top overarching goals, and we monitoring them. So so there is a goal and there's a timeline, correct? So it's not only the goal has to be met, the goal has to be met within the timeline. So when that happens, I would say a monitoring one, which is kind of a recent one, is a 4-month monitoring, 120 days or so. That's the last report that I have given to the CEO and executive team. If about 90% of the things are tracking to time and achievement, I would say, I think that is what I would call pretty good acquisition. And as I mentioned, it doesn't happen when Scotty Williams and Waddell Group did not acquire companies. The acquisition started the year I came in because they had such a huge market share that they were not able to do acquisition. The market share declined. That's when we did it. The first acquisition was, it was a pain because you learn the process. The second acquisition is better, and the third is, and so I think it's a learning game. And so I would say that, 90% of those the time frame on a basis.
But set your objectives up front,
Set your objectives up front. You've got
and then measure them
measure them.
regularly. I mean, it sounds like a regular project.
Every week, every week, 30, 60, 90, whatever it is.
I suppose part of your objective setting would be what things absolutely have to be done by X time for this thing to be considered.
Correct.
So you can define up front
You can.
what is successful. And maybe 90% of your objectives, you know, and these 8 have to be met, but 90% of the rest of what you're trying to accomplish.
Correct. I think the pace of these acquisition and the integration piece kind of takes off like a rocket, but it starts slowing down. And I think you know at that one very the fine point as to how things are faring, and very good insight into it. And you know the stumbling blocks, so you can probably sometimes the timelines get adjusted depending on what you find. In diligence, you can only know so much, and then after the acquisition, like the budget that we set for it was 10 million to remediate quality issues. And once we went in, we realized that their discussions with the FDA were totally different than what was conveyed to us. And we had to increase the budget to 20 million, which is not a small number. So it takes all the way to the CEO to know that, and the CEO to make FDA calls, and making sure that we understand that we are fully behind it. Yes, it's going to double the budget, but we are going to do it right. And so,
From my perspective is more again at the tactical execution level. We start off with a clear goal in mind. We need to accomplish this by this date, and oftentimes you have the stakeholder of the acquired company and their functions, and then you have the stakeholder of internal functional team that needs to receive it. And oftentimes our proposed method of integration is probably a compromise somewhere in between. They have an old way of doing things, and they have a new way of doing things, and the proposed way of doing things proposed by a guy like me typically works reasonably well for both parties, but not ideal for either. Right, the acquired business, they want to do as much of the old way as they can because they develop it for a good reason typically. And then the acquirer have a way of doing business and a way of doing things, and they don't want to deviate from their standard way of operating. But in this case, because we have a timeline constraint, we typically are delivering a half-baked solution. It's not ideal, it will work, but it's not ideal. It's on you to take it and continue to further integrate if there's such a word, and just like everything else, do continuing improvement.
I like the word compromise better than half-baked. So, let's use compromise.
Yep.
Negotiate.
Yeah, so it's, that's a tricky spot to get in, especially when you have a reach of, very wide.
How done is good enough, right?
Yep,
That's hard to set up front, isn't it?
yep. And this have to be decided early, right? And so it's a very fast way towards a reasonably good solution, and then everyone buy in on it before we can execute. Otherwise, we miss the entire thing.
So, okay. Questions?
I was a part of an acquired company at one point, and the acquisition team did it's, you're acquired, it's a scary time, you don't know what's going on. It was done very poorly, and the head of finance and the head of sales decided not to join the new company, so they lost a lot of institutional knowledge. As people who do the integration, how do you prevent that?
Yeah, I can take that. Again, this is not an uncommon scenario. It happens all the time. So I did mention during the early discussion that the HR planning piece is kind of most important. You need to know before you close the transaction as to who's willing to stay, not willing to stay, depending on what incentives you've been going to build. So I think if it comes to a surprise, it's a problem. So don't make it a surprise. Know it before you kind of close the transaction that this is going to happen. And we have tried building the incentive packages for them to kind of stick around, but they are not going to stick around. So build a contingency plan. Assume everybody's going to leave, kind of stuff. And I think go from there, but obviously you don't want that to happen. But there will be some people who will say, okay, you know what, I want to go do something else. And yeah, it's fine. You just need to build a contingency plan. So I would say avoid surprises. I think that would be my plan. Yeah.
Okay.
So, there's a lot of reasons why an acquirer and acquiree are coming together. I mean, maybe it's an early stage company and this is a perfect solution to their exit strategy and all that. Or maybe they had some trouble with finance, so they, for the next stage of growth, this acquiring company can help them do that. Or there could be something really sinister going on or unfriendly about an acquisition. And I don't know if that happens very often in the medical device or pharmaceutical industry, but have you had any experiences with something that was less friendly, if I could put it that way, and how would you deal with that? Because then it comes right into that HR and all that stuff, because now you got people that are maybe running away, and the best people leave first, of course.
Yeah.
They're the most desirable to be acquired by another company.
I think I haven't seen holistic resistance or pushback. I've seen in one stage is they are truly just overworked because of the additional workload that's taxed by this integration, and then at that point you really need to become part of the solution and truly inject resources and whatever it takes to alleviate that pain before they will be willing to cooperate again, right? And that's a true problem that needs to be solved. And another layer is just that mentality of, I think everyone needs to come to the same page in terms of what the goal is. I think no one really would be, shouldn't say no one, most people will be willing to cooperate if they buy into the holistic idea of what are we doing here.
Yeah.
And when they perceive you as coming in and drastically changing how we do business, you're gonna break a lot of things and this thing will not work. And then all of a sudden they lose motivation cooperating with you, right? But if you come through and clearly communicate that this is just a first baby step that we're gonna take on the long journey, we're gonna need to break stuff first before we can put them back together.
Yeah.
And it's not gonna happen in the next 6 months, so the next 6 months actually in the breaking process. And, we have to go through that before we become better. And once they are truly on the same page, I think things become easier.
It's kind of natural.
Communicate.
Yep.
The company being acquired is a little paranoia about losing control
Oh, yeah.
what's it gonna be like in a couple months?
Yep.
Like a year.
You know, most time these people care, right? They want their product to continue to be successful. They want their business to continue to run well. And if they see you coming in based on their experience as well, if we start doing this, we're gonna run into the problem that we ran into 3 years ago. And those concerns need to come out and needs to be talked about and addressed and agreed upon. And then typically things go a little bit smoother. And at a high level, I don't know for a fact that these happens, but I think the high level executive level, their obligations to the integrations typically agreed on. You gotta write this out before you could quit. And then at the next level down, I think there are retainers been put in place at the beginning if you're the key contributor and needs to be around. And there's ways to incentivize those individuals to be around to help. But obviously it does happen. People phase out somewhat unexpected, and we're gonna have to rally and resolve it.
Okay,
Yes.
please.
Yeah, question. All right, so earlier on, I think this is one of the first discussion topics, but we talked about the bigger company buying the smaller company and just like leaving them alone to operate. Can you tie that out with the idea that typically a bigger company will have a lot less tolerance for risk across like any number of functional areas and how they like find a happy spot for operations?
We typically err on the very conservative side as we start doing things. And as a larger corporation, you have a big target on your back, you have cash, and you could get sued, and you will get sued. And so that's typically non-negotiable, and that quality level, you definitely need to beef up to what our quality level is, and because your risk has grown exponentially, just the fact that you were acquired, and now you become, your benefit is obviously there, but your liability is by default adopted by bringing that name, right? So that's what I've seen is usually adopted from day one. You will be executing at this risk level.
And the same thing kind of translates into the customer interactions, positions. We're talking sales forces of different organizations of different sizes will interact differently. Hopefully they're both within the legal realm of how compliance views them. So Medtronic, again, or any big company has a big target on their back. They have a lot more stricter compliance procedures than many small organizations. Small organizations may not have the resources to even monitor, and so I would say that's a very, very critical part. And so I don't think Medtronic will negotiate.
Yeah, that's almost universal.
Yeah.
From what I've seen, a large organization just will demand that the mitigations we put in, if, there's they have to re-qualify their products, they have to do reviews of everything to make sure that it fits into the new system. So I think that's pretty universal. So, and to be expected.
But there are
A
areas
small
of-
company gets acquired by a larger company.
There are areas of flexibility for sure. For example, branding, correct? Do you need to do branding next day? No. Can it wait for a year? Sure. And it takes time to actually build branding. So, let's give an example of Kyphon, balloon kyphoplastic. That's the product, and that's strong brand. Actually, I would say that's one of the equals of electronics best brands, and so we didn't want to lose that. But now Medtronic brings its own power to the table, in terms of reputation, and not that Kaifon did not, but now how do we bring a successful merging? So we cannot say Medtronic, Balloon Kaifon Plastic. Now Kaifon Plastic was derived from Kaifon, the name, so we figured out a way to be inclusive. But it took 2 years to get to that, and it was not urgent. I mean, it was actually okay to come, but compliance procedures right away, audit procedures right away, you know, and but the branding piece was just kind of done over time. And so that helps.
Okay, well, I think we should wrap this up. So, Jitesh, thank you very much. G. Zane, awesome answers to these questions. And I'll put my little Waddell Group tag on the end. Clearly, we provide project managers for doing mergers and acquisitions work. So if that's of interest, I'm sure we'll let you know how to get a hold of us. Thanks.